Welcome to the Casey Ingram Show, where we break down the headlines, ask the tough questions, and bring you real conversations that matter right here on the Treasure Coast and beyond. I'm Casey Ingram. Let's get into it. A contractor pumps contaminated water into the Indian River Lagoon without a permit. Residents report it. Officials are notified. And yet, it happens again. So the question is, who pays to fix it? You or the contractor who caused it? Today, we're talking about what really happened and what happens next. Here's what we know. In March, residents began reporting muddy water being discharged into the river. Questions were raised about permits and whether this was even legal. Then in April, another incident. Since then, there's been a divide. Some want this handled quietly, others are pushing for full transparency. And now we're left with the bigger question: who is responsible for testing and cleanup? All right, today's guest is someone who doesn't just talk about service, he's lived it. Joining me is Commissioner Frank Tidikis from Sewall's Point, but his story goes way beyond local government. Before stepping into the public office, Frank was on the ground working directly with veterans through the Vietnam Veterans of America, helping lead efforts that delivered real, immediate support to those in crisis, cutting through red tape and getting help where it was needed fast. That same no nonsense, get it done mindset is exactly what he's bringing into government today. So, what happens when someone who's actually solved real problem steps into public office? Let's get into it. Commissioner Tidikis, thank you for being here.
Good morning. Pleasure to be with you this morning.
It's certainly a pleasure to have you on the show. And I know you're off doing some things with the family, so I appreciate you taking time out of your personal schedule to share this with us today. Let's go ahead and start. Walk us through the timeline from the first incident in March to what happened in April.
Well, in March, let me back up. Town of Sewell's Point is putting in sewer lines and is also putting in a new water line. Martin County Utilities putting in the water line, we're putting in the sewer line. There are several contractors working on the job. And in order to put the piping in, they have to do something called dewatering. And dewatering is where you pump the groundwater out of the ground and it has to go somewhere. And so they were pumping it into the Indian River Lagoon. Now, the first instance that happened in March, the contractor did have a permit. However, they were not following the guidelines of the permit. The permit said that you have to put up a barrier in the water so that the silt doesn't expand over a large area. You have to do other things in terms of covering drains while you're doing this, and that you also need to pump through a stormwater treatment area or a drain, an outfall. And they weren't doing that. They were pumping into a drain that led directly into the Indian River Lagoon. Well, the contractor was called on this. They stopped. And then and April 4th, which was Easter weekend, another contractor turned around and was doing the same thing, was dewatering in a different location and pumping directly into the lagoon by the archipelago. So obviously we didn't learn from the first time, and it kept repeated the second time. When several residents called myself and another commissioner, Dave Kurzman. We went down to look at it and see what was going on. They also called the police. The police called the town manager. Mr. Kurzman and I called the town manager, but he responded to the police. He told the police that this contractor had a permit. They did not have a permit. Uh, so the pump continued all through that night, and it laid out a pretty good plume of silt into the Indian River Lagoon. So I put together a timeline, and I normally do a recap after each meeting, a commission meeting, and send it out to people that I have their email addresses. So I put out this timeline and I sent it out and asked the question, are we walking the walk or just talking the talk? Because we have three levels of oversight. First of all, CapTech is being paid to monitor the contractors and see that they're doing and the job according to the specifications. Then on top of CapTech, there's another company called Culpeper and Temmening that is paid to monitor CapTech and make sure that CapTech's doing the job. And then we have a town manager that's responsible, and it has a contractors meeting every 2 weeks to make sure that the job is running smoothly and according to plan. Well, between the March incident and the April incident, I asked the question, was this brought up at the contractor meeting? And what was the upshot of that? Were minutes kept of these meetings so that all the contractors were aware that they had, if they were going to do any dewatering, they had to do it according to the permits that they had. The second contractor did not have a permit, and they were out there on a Saturday and a Sunday, Easter weekend. So somebody knew they were out there. Somebody's getting paid overtime. Somebody authorized this crew to come out and do this, but yet nobody's owning up to it.
And once again, they were not authorized that weekend or permitted to do that.
That's correct.
So, what did the water look like? What did it smell like?
Well, the water on the second pumping smelled like rotten eggs. It had a high sulfur content. And this happened in front of a 122 South Sewell's Point Road. Now, the resident at that location has their septic system in the front yard because their backyard is the Indian River Lagoon. And so their septic system, when they were dewatering, obviously they were dewatering from the effluent that's coming out of the septic system around that area. And that was getting pumped directly into the lagoon.
Mm, wow.
Uh,
So, once it was reported, how long did it take to stop that discharge?
Over 20.
So, what do you think happened there? And they reported it. Why did it take so long?
Well, the town manager and I pulled the police report because I wanted the officers showed up. The officers were very good. They looked and they saw that there was no barrier for turbidity set out in the lagoon, that this wasn't being pumped into a stormwater treatment area, and they put that in their police report. They also put in the police report that they had spoken to the town manager, who told them that the company had a permit. Unfortunately, it was a different company, and the company did not have a permit. So as a result of that, the officers let the pumps continue to run. Now, when the officers also checked with the chief of police asked them to take pictures and to verify that there were no barriers up. And so as a result of that, they did that. And that's all in their police report. So it wasn't until the next day that somebody was reached from the contractors, and somebody from Captech, who is responsible for oversight, came out, saw what was going on, turned the pumps off. But by that time, well, one of the residents calculated that over 1 million gallons had gone into the lagoon. And he did this based on, taking what the pump capacity was versus multiplied out the amount of time that the pump had run. But anyway, there was a significant amount of water that was put into the lagoon.
So, has there been any type of follow up investigation or just, reason why the town manager was confused about what's authorized, what's permitted, and what's not, and who has those permits?
It was Easter weekend. He was out of town. He knew that the first company that had violated this back in March, on March 24th, did have a permit, although they weren't following the permit, which basically, said that you have to pump into a stormwater area. You also have to put up turbidity barriers so that you stop a plume from going into the lagoon. So even though they had a permit, they weren't following it. Mr. Daniels thought that the same company was doing this again, and that's why he responded to the police that, there was that they had a permit. And so the police weren't about to stop it because they were told that they had a permit. So it wasn't until the next day that Representative Captech came out and took a look at it and said, no, they don't have a permit, and turned the pumps off.
Who hired this third party or third contractor? Was it
Uh,
the town or Captech?
No, the town. We have several government grants for this work, and part of the claim, and this is your taxpayer money and my taxpayer money, that basically says we need a checker to check the checker.
Right. That's government for you.
Right. There you go. And so as a result of that, we have Captech that is responsible for, and that we're paying for oversight of the contractors in this situation to make sure that they're doing things according to spec. And then we have Culpeper and Temning that were hired to make sure that Captech was doing the right thing and making sure that things were according to spec. And then the third level is the town manager that's supposed to be making sure that the contractors are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we have three levels of oversight. And unfortunately, the three levels of oversight dropped the ball.
It is, and just from my perspective, an outsider perspective, watching your commission meeting this past week, I think one of the comments was, this is embarrassing to Sewell's point. How could we let this happen? But honestly, to me, it kind of looked like a contractor that went rogue on a weekend. I don't think this reflects poorly, specifically on the village, or I'm sorry, the town. It was a rogue contractor. I think what is going to reflect on the town is how you handle it from here on out. It happened. This contractor, I can't imagine myself, an environmental contractor, not realizing you need a permit, an authorization to dump water that you're dewatering. And we're going to talk about that hole and what's in it, the contaminants that could be in it here in a little bit. How a contractor cannot realize that was improper, completely improper.
Well, I don't disagree with you. I mean, first of all, somebody had to authorize the crews to come out on Easter weekend. And this was set up on a Saturday of Easter weekend, and it continued to pump Saturday night and through part of Sunday. So, first of all, the crew would have been on overtime and would have had to been paid overtime. Somebody would have had to authorize the crew to come out and do this. So you're absolutely right. I mean, this was a rogue operation, and that I guess folks figured, well, this is going to be a holiday weekend. Nobody's going to be watching, except the residents that had the plume in their backyard.
Right, right, right. And it brings up so many questions. Easter weekend, why are you working then? And then you have a grant for so much money to pay for all these things. Now you're paying overtime, time and a half to folks. So that uses up the grant money even quicker. There's just a lot of questions to be answered, whether intentional or not. But it does sound like there should be a deeper investigation, especially into that contractor that did that. My first question would be why?
That you're absolutely right. And that was the question. Well, one of the questions that I raised. The idea and the goal here is to make sure it doesn't happen again. Number one. Number two is that, the contractor that has the permit follow the rules according to the permit. Now, I'll tell you that since our meeting on Tuesday evening, things have gotten a lot better. When they're working in an area and there are drains in that area, they're supposed to be covered so the debris doesn't fall into the drains. That's happening. The turbidity barriers are up. They're pumping into the stormwater treatment areas. And if a stormwater treatment area isn't available or an outfall isn't available, then what they're doing is they're bringing in a vacuum truck and they're sucking the water out and putting it into a vacuum truck and then dumping it in another approved area. So we've moved in the right direction. And now one of the issues that came up at the meeting is, are they testing the water? And we were told, the residents and the commissioners were told, oh yeah, they've tested the water. Well, they were testing the water for turbidity. They weren't testing the water for any other for nitrogen or any other things that might have been going into the river. So we've requested as a commission that Mr. Daniels at the next meeting bring back a program for testing to see whether or not any negative elements are going into the lagoon.
Agree. Now, Commissioner Tidikis, do you know, has the DEP, I mean, there's federal laws, there's state laws about discharging into our Indian River Lagoon. Do you know if they've brought into it and if they've had any response?
Yes, DEP was brought into it. Mr. Daniels notified both South Florida Water Management District and the Department of Environmental Protection, and both agencies have visited the site and took a look at what was going on, did some turbidity testing. And turbidity is just to see what's the clarity of the water. Well, by the time they got out there, the water was clear. So it's like we're closing the door after the barn door after the horses gotten out. But that's okay. They came out and they took a look at it, and they basically, after the first incident, DEP came out and they were very adamant that, the contractor could dewater, but they had to follow the rules of the permit, which was to cover the drains, to pump into an outfall or a stormwater treatment area. And if they weren't doing that, then they had to shut it down. The second contractor didn't have a permit and they just did what they were going to do. But now I think everybody's on watch and the contractors are following the rules of the permit. So we've made progress.
Commissioner Tidikis, the first incident was a turbidity issue. The second incident was actually just discharging dirty water into the Indian River Lagoon. Did the DEP come out on the second incident as well?
They came out on the second incident as well, but by the time they got out there, um, the pumps were turned off on Easter Sunday. They didn't get out there. They were notified. They didn't get out there until late Monday, maybe Tuesday morning. And so as a result of that, the turbidity issue had disappeared.
Right. Did anybody keep a sample of the water that was being discharged into the lagoon?
I think there are one or two residents on the archipelago. One of the residents told me that he has a sample in his refrigerator. I'm not quite sure how his wife feels about that, but
Exactly. It's not chocolate milk. Oh, goodness. But good for them. Good for them. It may come in handy. You never know. There also seems to be a divide. Some prefer to handle this quietly, others want everything out in the open. Where do you stand on that?
well, I'm I'm on the sunshine is a great disinfectant. I had requested that this be put on the agenda for the town meeting on Tuesday evening, and I swung by town hall. The packets normally go out on Thursday or Friday. I went by Thursday afternoon, got a copy of the agenda. It wasn't on the agenda. I was told this isn't a final, and then Friday it came out, but it was under discussion and not new business.
Okay.
Um, so, but I wanted it on the agenda because I wanted the commissioners to be aware of what was going on. If it hadn't been on the agenda, it wouldn't have been discussed that night. And then who knows whether or not the problem would have been resolved.
So, why is transparency important in a situation like this? And then what happens when the public feels like they're not getting answers? Because there was a lot of public comment this past week.
Yep, we had a very healthy turnout at the meeting, which was good to see. And people were not happy with what was had transpired. Now, I mean, the good news is there are a number of residents that are alerted to the situation, and it won't happen. And if it were to happen again, it would be reported, and it would be reported quickly. If people weren't aware of what was going on, folks would just drive by and say, oh, there's a plume in the river, other than the people that live along the river. So I think it's important for the residents to know what's going on. And I send out an email recap of each meeting and basically outline the issues that came up and also outline how the votes went and why I voted the way I voted. I think that's important to know. I've had other commissioners question why I do that, and I think every commissioner ought to be able to stand up and say, this is why I voted and how I voted. But that's just me.
Amen, Commissioner Tidikis. I'm all for government transparency. After all, it is our tax dollars. And you all, when you get elected, you're dedicating your time to represent the people's voice. So I think transparency is of utmost importance. We don't see enough of it in government. So hats off to you for being one of those commissioners that really, you're true to your word about transparency. It's not just a word you throw out lightly.
Well, I ran on three issues. Ran on transparency, greater citizen involvement, and fiscal responsibility. And, from a fiscally responsible standpoint, we're spending over $700,000 for oversight on this project, and between Captech and Culpeper and Temning. And so I think we should get our money's worth.
Well, that brings me to my next point. For this project, there has already been 7 change orders for a net amount over $129,000 without approval from the town manager or commission. So let's talk about what everyone really wants to know. Who's going to pay to fix this?
Well, right now, the town residents are going to pay to fix this if there's any remediation. I had suggested that we turn around and our town attorney send a letter to the contractors and saying that if there was any liability in this or any expense with remediation, that they would be responsible for that. Unfortunately, the balance of the commission did not feel that that was the appropriate way to go.
Commissioner Tidikis, aren't they required to be insured and bonded for such incidents just like this so that that money does not fall onto the residents and taxpayers?
I would think so, yes. It's in the contract.
Okay, that's hard. It's hard for me to understand why you put that on your citizens, but it's a good conversation. So maybe the next meeting, some folks can come out and share their thoughts on that. Um, the remediation testing itself, is the contractor paying for that, or again, do the citizens have to pay for testing on what the contractor did with an unauthorized and unpermitted work?
Well, Mr. Daniels is coming back at the next meeting that we have on the 27th of April, along with a testing program and a recommendation. Now, who will bear the expense of that? That's going to be up for discussion that night.
If the taxpayers end up paying, what precedent does that set?
I think it sets a very poor precedent because the taxpayers didn't cause the problem.
Right.
You know, we had a contractor that wasn't following the rules, wasn't following the law, that basically caused the problem. And that contractor, I think, should bear responsibility.
Has that contractor been cited or penalized? So we've officially had two lost summers, 2013 and 2016. But the harder truth is, we've spent over a decade with a lagoon that's been struggling almost every single summer since. When the rain hits the road, it carries oil, gasoline, brake fluid, heavy metals like copper, zinc, lead from vehicles, fertilizers, pesticides from nearby landscaping, trash, microplastics, tire particles, you name it. It's bacteria from, waste, all kinds of things. Runoff is loaded with that nitrogen and phosphorus, and those are the nutrients that fuel those harmful algal blooms that we've seen in the past, which blocks the sunlight and it kills the seagrass and it makes it a no oxygen zone. So, this is a very serious thing to all of us because the Indian River Lagoon has already lost a massive amount of seagrass. It is the most diverse estuary in the United States. So, personally, from somebody who's marched to Washington, D.C. and Tallahassee countless times on behalf of our Indian River Lagoon, I appreciate your transparency here. I do agree going forward, we have to make sure this doesn't happen again. And I just wanted to throw that out. I mean, what happens if the steps being taken now don't make sure that this never happens again? I mean, how are we going to keep this accountable?
On the positive side, okay, the town of Sewell's Point has embarked on several major projects. One project is the road resiliency project, to where what we're doing is we're raising the road a foot and a half, and we're also rebuilding all of our outfalls so that they meet DEP requirements. All of the drains then will go into these refurbished outfalls that will stop what you're talking about from flowing into the lagoon. And hopefully will get captured in the outfall basins. And so that's a huge step forward. The town was the projects are over $35 million. Now, once that's built, then it's up to us, the town, to maintain those outfalls and make sure that they're operating properly. And so the town has developed an outfall maintenance program and a schedule. And so we'll be moving forward in that direction. That's the good news. The second part of this is that the town has also embarked on a septic sewer program that's highly controversial. However, in the low lying, and I'm in favor of it in the low lying areas, to where when we had major storms and hurricanes, and particularly if you got a king tide, you had a situation to where low lying areas and backyards and areas would flood. So the septic systems were inundated in water. Well, by putting in the first thing we did was we put a sewer line down South Sewell's Point Road, which was a low-lying area, and people can hook up to that. And as a result of that, that will stop the whole issue of, septic systems being inundated in flood water. So major step forward. The positive side, the good news, the town has taken that step. It's just that as we're building it, I mean, we also have to be environmentally conscious while we're doing that too. I mean, it's a two-step process. So,
It is. And that's why, I appreciate you sharing those things because they're very important. And I think that the town is doing tremendous strides to do their part, in making sure that the Indian River Lagoon isn't contaminated. And that's why maybe I'm a little surprised the town is looking. I consider it a penalty on the residents for what a rogue contractor did, who is a professional in the field and should know better than to just discharge contaminated water into the Indian River Lagoon. So again, I don't think this is about what Sewell's point, their reputation with the Indian River Lagoon. I think it's how they handle this particular incident and who has to bear the brunt of the finances to clean up that issue.
well, I agree with you, Casey. I mean, what we're talking about is accountability.
Right.
And, if you don't hold somebody accountable, what's the incentive to not repeat the same mistake?
That's right.
And so there is no incentive. And if if it happens again, it's like, oh, well, I'm sorry, but oh, well is not a good response.
It's not a good response. And also, it separates brings the cream to the top, so to speak, as far as, let's just say, environmental contractors. You want the reputable ones that knew better. Those are the ones that you want to be able to give a good review for. Those are the ones in the future. Yep, we're going to hire that person. If you just brush this under the rug, people aren't going to know there are different levels of services from these environmental contractors. I'm stunned that an environmental contractor did this. So I kind of harp on that a little bit. It just shocks me in this day and age and all the issues we have with our River Lagoon. A contractor did that, and now the town is considering not, holding them accountable for it.
You and I are on the same page there. Yeah.
All right, so we'll wrap this up. But for the residents watching, how will they know this is being handled properly from here on out?
Well, the only thing I can tell you is you can come to the town meetings, and this will be a discussion as we monitor what's going on into the future. The project will be wrapped up by the end of June. So we have about another 2 or 3 months to keep an eye on it. And let me say that the contractors have they are complying with the permit now. They're covering the drains, they're dewatering into the outfalls. So all that is moving down the pike. And I think it's a positive thing because now Mr. Daniels is watching Culpeper and Tenning, who's watching Captech, who's watching the contractors.
No wonder things fall through the cracks. That's honestly a lot of people watching a lot of different things. So just saying.
Just say your tax dollars at work.
Exactly, exactly. So I'm glad that things are happening as they should have been from the start. That's the whole thing, is these issues should have been just done properly from the beginning. It's happened and you guys are addressing it. And for you, Commissioner Tidikis, thank you for bringing this up for everybody. It's just such an important issue, and it is for the whole area. Sewell's Point is in such a beautiful location, and you guys, take care of your beautiful locale. And it's unfortunate something like this happened, but again, it wasn't the town. You had a road contractor, and it's transparency moving forward, fixing it, and by stepping up, those residents stepping up, at least they put a stop to it, so it's not continuing.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about it. Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. And at the end of the day, this comes down to trust in leadership, trust in oversight, and trust that when something goes wrong, the right people, not the public, are held accountable. Thanks for tuning into the Casey Ingram Show. If you found value in today's conversation, make sure to follow us on Facebook at the Casey Ingram Show and subscribe on YouTube so you never miss an episode. I'm Casey Ingram. See you next time. Thank you, Commissioner Tidikis. Appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Have a great weekend.